welcome to episode 208 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Nathan Smith,
Dylan Moore,
Malcolm Vaughn.
In today's episode, we will be talking about movies we saw this week in part 1 and in part 2. Sadly, we will be concluding our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series, but we will conclude it on a high note with 1986's The Green Ray, and Dan Molloy of the Catalyst and Witness podcast is going to be joining us to talk about it. He was the one who suggested it to us, so we thought that it was a good chat. I'm glad he came on, and hopefully you guys will enjoy that talk. Get some Eric Romer in your life. I was glad that I did. But let's go ahead and kick off with the big release from this past week, and that is BlacKkKlansman. Andrew and Lydia wrote a long review about the film on cinematary.com, but I think most everybody in this has seen it. Malcolm, have you seen BlacKkKlansman yet?
I have seen BlacKkKlansman.
So everybody has seen this movie. I'm curious to hear what everybody else thinks. I know Lydia and Andrew were both very high on it in their review. But Nathan, I'm curious to hear you first, just because you've been going through some of Spike Lee's movies recently leading up to this, and it seemed like you were kind of mellow on this one.
Yeah, I, like you said, had been going through trying to fill a lot of the blind spots that I have left with Lee. I mean, the guy has just an endless filmography and has done too many masterpieces. And unlike a certain amount of people, I think that Lee has stayed good as a filmmaker. I think that at the very least, he's always doing something that's worth watching, even if it doesn't entirely work. But I generally am more generous to the last decade of his whole filmography than a lot of people. I mean, we did a very long time ago an episode comparing the two versions of Old Boy, and I am much more fond of Spike Lee's remake of Old Boy than I am of the original, honestly. And as I like The Sweet Blood of Jesus and Red Hook Summer quite a bit as well. Chirac, I also liked. Miracle at St. Anna, which was really the last wide release movie that he had in 2008, is maybe my least favorite of all his movies that I've seen. And so, I was excited to see him do a movie that is getting a wide release. He won Best Director prize at Cannes. This movie is produced by Jordan Peele, who's obviously, hot off Get Out, and so that brought a lot of attention to this film. And so generally I am very happy to see Spike Lee doing a movie that is getting attention, that has money behind it, that is doing well, and that has been getting positive reviews. But I was just a little disappointed by the film itself. It is maybe one of his most formulaic or generic movies. I mean, even something like Inside Man, which is very much a just sort of straight up genre piece, I feel like even has a little bit more subversive of genre kind of tropes and lines than this is, which this is very much a sort of police procedural buddy cop movie. Not kindly, the critic Miriam Bale compared it to the Owen Wilson remake of Starsky and Hutch. And I think this movie is works a little bit as a comedy. John David Washington is really funny, and has a good presence, and Adam Driver's also got a good kind of rapport. There's some nice banter. There's some funny stunt casting. You have Topher Grace as David Duke. So it's all in all not a movie that I disliked, but it just isn't quite the sort of incendiary, provocative movie that I feel like a lot of people are saying it is, except for the last few minutes of the movie, which, in case you don't know, the movie has a smash cut from this period piece, about a black police officer infiltrating the KKK. Boom, smash cut to the to Charlottesville 1 year ago. This movie coming out on the year anniversary of the Unite the Right protest in Charlottesville and the murder of Heather Hare. The movie is dedicated to her, that was like an intensely emotional experience, seeing that footage in a theater with an audience in a way that for me the rest of the movie really was not. I mean, the movie to me felt like very sort of preaching the choir, like, oh look, a lot hasn't changed since the 1960s, that sort of thing. Just a lot of like references to Trump that just sort of felt like a sort of little nod to people in the crowd who are like really like sticking it to Cheeto hands, that kind of thing. The sort of centrist humor that I just really find super annoying and ineffective. I mean, it's fun. It's without and not without its pleasures. I mean, I think Spike Lee seems very interested here, and maybe more interested than anything else in like film history. He talks about Birth of a Nation a couple times in the movie, and that film's role in American history. And obviously, since this movie's about the Klan, that's very an extremely important part of like the Klan's history and mythology is the publicity that Birth of a Nation gave them. So I think that stuff is really interesting. But the rest of the movie just feels very muddled to me. Uses just these sort of like caricatured depictions of the racist Klan members. I mean, the movie's set in Colorado, but like all the guys in the movie seem just like Alabama hillbillies, and that sort of like hee-haw kind of stereotype, which just like doesn't feel super effective when you're like trying to kind of propose how to fight back against the extreme right. And so it just I don't know. I've been talking for a while. What do you guys think? I don't know if anybody else is as down on this movie as I am, but what are you guys feeling?
I think I'm a little bit more up than you, but not much. And I've also kind of been going through Spike Lee's stuff congruently, I guess. And there's something kind of disappointing about this movie where like Spike Lee doesn't give you that hot take that the personal touch does not feel as much there. I feel like maybe its biggest problem, it never really reconciles the lead. I forgot his name. I'm so bad. But
Ron Stallworth.
Ron Stallworth never really reconciles Ron Stallworth's role as a policeman, and if it's morally right for him to be there, it doesn't really make a decision on that point. If anything, maybe leads more towards the cop side when we see them arrest that racist officer, which is like basically a fantasy sequence. Nothing in real life like that would ever happen, So like, I don't know. Kind of towards the end, it doesn't really seem to tie up any of the the questions that that kind of need to be answered to make this film feel kind of effective, or it doesn't even really give you much closure on that part. So I'm kind of disappointed in that aspect, and especially
I think it bears mentioning too that now that you brought up that point, that today it just came out that Spike Lee several years ago was paid $200,000 by the New York Police Department to basically consult on the police department's image and its kind of relationship with the community, to create ads to sort of develop and improve the relationship between the NYPD and the public of New York City, which even I think kind of raises questions about this movie's views on policing even more than we're already there.
To both of y'all's points, with that arrest of the racist cop right at the end, I think this is at least in part because I watched Inside Man again recently, that they have both this similar closure where after the arrest of the police officer, it's like, oh, good, we got the obvious racist asshole out of the police. But both of them have the police commissioner basically saying in both those very different cases to bury everything that you found or let it go. So it like has both like corrupt system, but then getting out bad actors inside of it. But still, obviously, as you guys are saying, kind of leaving it in this ambivalent space, not really going to anything, but, at least there's good people trying to do a good job in it. Right.
Right. And I think for me, there were a few moments in the movie where it really gestures at this sort of kinship between the KKK and the police. There's a scene where like Adam Driver's character says, we don't rat out our fellow cops even if we don't agree with them because we're a family. And Ron Starless says, that reminds me of somebody else we know. And that's like the one scene in the movie where it really sort of hints at this relationship and the ways that these organizations operate, have a lot of similarities. There's also another moment in the movie when David Duke finally shows up in the flesh and meets Ron Stallworth. There's this like brief shot of this like secret Klan handshake where they're like tapping each other on the wrist. That's just like very, that sort of just like interest in detail and sort of like, I wish that there was a version of this movie where it was more devoted to like documenting the ways that both of these organizations have their like secretive practices and operate in very similar disturbing ways. Instead, the movie sort of just kind of goes to this moral relationship between the Klan and black radical activists. I will say it is refreshing to see a movie where like black radicals and the Black Panther Party are like the moral center. They are right. They are they're questioned by the police and they're the police, the chief says, they're the greatest threat to the United States. But there's no doubt that Lee is sided with them and wants us as viewers to be sided with them, which I think is undoubtedly a good thing and something that I think is much needed in American cinema. But it just sort of reduces it to this like, this is the good side, this is the bad side, and then you have the police somewhere ambivalently hanging unaddressed. And I think it would be to Lee's benefit and to the benefit of the movie to address that relationship between the police and the Klan even more.
There's also a scene later in the film where you have the Klan taking part in their initiation ceremony, and I can't remember, I think it's before they watch Birth of a Nation, or it's during, or it's during that sequence when they're watching the actual movie in the basement. Mm-hmm. And there's these chants of white power, and then it juxtaposes with the meeting with the group that Laura Harrier's the black character, that Black Student Union they're having this whole meeting and they start chanting Black Power. You have this like juxtaposition between that, the Klan scene and that scene. And I mean, what did you guys make of that? It was kind of a weird I wasn't sure what Spike was trying to say there with that whole back and forth.
I felt there was maybe like a tonal inconsistency there, because before, like, they say white power, black power, back and forth, we see the stories, and the story at the Black Student Union is of a man being lynched, right? And
Harry Belafonte shows up for a few minutes.
Mm-hmm. And the other is the white power rallies, definitely not as sentimental or powerful as a story. So I don't really get that decision, and it doesn't really make sense within the context of the scene for me.
Zach, I had similar sort of questions about that cross-cutting sequence after I came out of the movie, and I was like, it feels like there's you could interpret that as this like gotta hear both sides, like, white power and black power, it's the same thing. I think there's a way in which somebody could read that as I feel like that. That's definitely not Lee's point. I think ultimately, and Malcolm, you bring up the scene with Harry Belafonte, I feel like ultimately what Lee's trying to say, and I think it gets a little bit muddled, but for me, it feels like, you have the Klan rally, you have them watching Birth of a Nation, saying these despicable things, and then you have that juxtaposed with the story of this really awful, just brutal depraved lynching. And to me, it sort of is Lee saying, like, this is, the very real violence and the very real consequences of this sort of language. Because I think that's a thing that a lot of people, an argument a lot of people try to use today of like, oh, this is just language. Like, it doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't have a real world impact. To me, that feels like Lee saying, like, no, it like literally does, because it is that kind of language that enables the violence that we then hear from Harry Belafonte. I feel like it gets a little, the execution to me is not perfect, but I feel to me that is sort of what I ultimately decided on that sequence saying.
I could see that actually now that you explain it, because it also, like, theirs is like the Black Student Union. It's all rooted in reality. These are things, that happen, and can contrast that with the White Power rally, them just tooting and hollering to Birth of a Nation, living it, complete fantasy. Most of the oppression / the power is kind of just made up in their own kind of neuroses, which is, yeah.
Well, BlacKkKlansman, it is in theaters now, but please check out Andrew and Lydia's review on cinematary.com. Nathan, I'm going to toss it over to you because you have a very different shade of movies that we're going to talk about now.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about two movies that are very different, and I'll try to keep it brief on both of them. Two movies that are very different but are very exploitative in their own ways. The first movie I want to talk about is Larry Charles's Bruno from 2009, starring Sacha Baron Cohen as the gay Austrian fashion journalist Bruno from his show, The Ali G Show. This is the third movie by Sacha Baron Cohen, based off of that television program after Borat and Ali G in the house. This is a movie I did not see when it came out, but I remember it coming out. I mean, I was never going to see this unless I snuck in, because my parents, no way in hell would they ever, take me to see something like this. I don't even know if I wanted to see Bruno when it came out. I really don't remember. But I really like Borat a lot. And I've been watching a little bit of Sacha Baron Cohen's new show on Showtime, Who is America, which I think has some really funny stuff in it. So I was wanting to take a look at this movie, and I had talked to a few friends who had watched it a little bit before me, who said, "Oh, it's really good. It's better than people said it was at the time," because I feel like generally at the time the movie got a mixed to negative reception, at least compared to Borat. I don't think it was as well received as Borat was. And I think this is an interesting movie just because Borat was such a big hit that there was such a greater risk with this movie that people, would be familiar with Sacha Baron Cohen, that they would recognize him, that they, would be familiar with this character, just because his profile had grown so much larger. So there is this greater element of risk and this greater nervousness with the stunts pulled in this movie. And I will also say it goes even just generally further than Borat. It's generally more depraved, more tasteless, more offensive in every possible way. But it's also this kind of movie generally that interests me. Regular listeners of the show will know that I am very fond of the Jackass movies, and generally am interested in I have a broader interest in 2000s gross out comedies, but I'm generally interested in these sort of hybrid movies that are synthesizing nonfiction and fiction, this, kind of candid camera pranks. So I was pleasantly surprised by this movie. It's interesting looking at it now from almost a decade on. I feel like at the time, and I'm sure some people still feel this way, but felt it was maybe very homophobic. But I think it's honestly actually in a weird way related to some of the points that we were making in our discussion about BlacKkKlansman, because ultimately what I feel like this movie is trying to do, and why I think I maybe like it more than Borat, is because it has a very specific target. I think Borat is a little broader. Borat, is very concerned with Islamophobia, but is more generally about just the insidious ignorance of Americans. And this movie is more specifically about homophobia and about the violence that the language of homophobia is a euphemism for. Like I was saying with BlacKkKlansman, where you see the result of the language of racism, you see the real physical result. This movie kind of goes deeper into the homophobic comments that people might casually make, and ends with this just like riot at the sight of two men kissing each other. So I feel like it is designed as this sort of mechanism to extract the violence that is signified by homophobic language and slurs. It feels much more riskier, like I was saying, and much more dangerous than Borat. And it goes a lot farther in ways that I don't quite know how I feel about, like the talk show scene, the Richard Bay talk show scene, where he introduces his adopted African baby named OJ. And it's like the audience is just like tearing him apart, and you feel like something is just going to explode. People are walking out, people are just standing up yelling at him. And so it feels like it gets extremely uncomfortable, and there's still stuff where I'm like, I don't know. But then at the same time, you have stuff like there's a scene where he accosts a group of Westboro Baptist Church protesters while strapped to his lover with this like crazy bondage mechanism, and he gets Bruno and his lover Lutz get on board the bus with these protesters while wearing this crazy bondage gear. So you have stuff like that feels very much like punching back at the oppressor, very clearly. And I will also say that there's a weird way in which this movie, watching it now, it feels like oddly predictive of Milo Yiannopoulos, just his like whole persona, because Bruno is also this like blonde highlights, Nazi sympathetic, flamboyant, gay provocateur who just wants to like say the most shocking and most offensive thing to get as much attention as he possibly can. So it's like kind of weird watching it now just for that reason. Like that's something that it really reminded me of in some of like its most horrifying moments, like the scene where Bruno makes Paula Abdul like sit on a quote Mexican chair people. That just feels like this sort of like indication of where our world was heading around 2009. So I don't know. I think it's definitely a movie that with time, I think more people will come around on, just because it goes for it even more than Borat does, and it's like a true sight to behold. You really got to see it to believe this thing. It's something else. It's on Amazon Prime right now. And the second film I wanted to talk about real quickly is also sort of exploitative trash in its own way, but a very different kind of movie, and that is Star 80 from Bob Fosse, the last movie Bob Fosse made before his untimely death. Came out in 1983, stars Mariel Hemingway and Eric Roberts in like career best performances. And it's a loosely fictionalized retelling of the real-life story of Dorothy Stratton, who is a Playboy model from Vancouver, Canada, who's Playmate of the Year in 1980, and was then killed by her husband, Paul Snider, who was sort of a scummy con artist, low-life pimp type, who discovered Dorothy at a Dairy Queen, became her sort of agent and manager, married her, and then they moved to Los Angeles together. Her career took off very quickly. She became a Playboy bunny and a very successful playmate, and then eventually became an actress, and working with Peter Bogdanovich in his movie They All Laughed, and she and Bogdanovich became very close, eventually started a relationship together, and Paul Snider, who had increasingly become irrelevant after they moved to Los Angeles, Dorothy realized that she didn't need him to be successful, that he was just sort of a leech hanging off of her coattails. She grew distant from him, and he grew jealous and stalked and eventually essentially murdered Dorothy Stratton and then killed himself. So this is a sort of real juicy, rip from the headlines, trashy kind of story. There was actually a television movie made the year before, the same story but starring Jamie Lee Curtis, but this is the more famous one. And also, interestingly enough, cinematography by Sven Nykvist, Ingmar Bergman's regular cinematographer. So it's a very nice looking movie. I saw it at the Quad Cinema. They're doing a retrospective on Bob Fosse. I really like his movie All That Jazz, which we did an episode on a couple years back. And this is really his only non-musical movie. This is something that, compared to like Cabaret and All That Jazz, feels a little bit more impersonal and a little bit like a for-hire job, which I'm sure it was. But at the same time, you really have this sort of Fosse touch. I mean, you've got that incredible, flashy, almost like jump smash cut sort of montage. Where you have just like flashing images, you see Dorothy's photos pop up. It's constantly cutting ahead to the murder-suicide. You're having these sort of flashbacks and flash forwards. It's really jagged, harsh movie. At the same time, it's not all style. It's not all Fosse. It's really grounded in two incredible performances. I think Mariel Hemingway is like sort of used similarly to how she is in Manhattan and in another really underseen movie that she was in around this time, Personal Best by Robert Towne, where she sort of plays, this young, naive girl who, we think is very innocent. We maybe think is a little clueless, but then we soon realize is actually very smart, and someone who like instantly becomes like very capable and mature, and just sort of shifts on a dime. So it's she gives this very layered, nuanced performance. And Peter Bogdanovich was like very upset with this movie, said it caused him emotional distress. He later wrote a book about his relationship with Dorothy Stratton, and then married her younger sister, who was like a little kid when this all happened. So that's kind of weird. But Dorothy, though, even though Mariel Hemingway is incredible and Dorothy Stratton is on the poster and she's sort of the attraction, it's really more a movie about Paul Snider, who's played by Eric Roberts, who gives an absolutely astonishing performance. He is just this like creepy, scummy, pathetic dude, like just one of the worst kind of men ever in a movie. But he is absolutely amazing. I mean, on one hand, he has this sort of like cocky, overconfident image, but at the same time, he's super awkward, super bumbling, never knows how to talk to people. He's always trying to get ahead in a conversation, figure out how we can manipulate the situation and get what he wants. But he's not that good at it. He's not that talented. It honestly reminded me a little bit of Hustle and Flow, which we talked about a couple months back. Just because it is this like quintessential like pimp character who is trying to convince everybody else that he is of value to them when he's really not of value to anyone, and it's just taking and taking and taking and kind of exploiting along the way. Roger Ebert was a big fan of this movie and kind of coined the term Star 80 syndrome, which like is not really a term, but he used it to describe other movies. But he said basically, Eric Roberts is amazing in this movie, but he's never going to win an award for it because he's such a creep, which I think is kind of sort of sadly like speaks to his career. I mean, the dude has been in like over 500 movies, but I never really had like a big prestige career, and I think it's precisely because he is so good at playing someone who's absolutely disgusting. But I mean, it's an absolutely amazing performance that I really think that more people need to see. Respect Eric Roberts. He's a better actor than people think, and this movie really proves it. And so you got a bunch of artists at the top of their game: Mariel Hemingway, Eric Roberts, Bob Fosse, Sven Nykvist. Really, I mean, a movie that's going to make you feel dirty, going to make you want to maybe take a shower, but it's very good. So yeah.
All right, Malcolm and Dylan, you each have a movie. One enters, or two enter, one out. It comes out with the movie they want to talk about.
I'm so sorry that I talked for so long.
Hey, Malcolm, you go ahead.
Okay. All right. Well, I chose I chose Canyon Passage by Jacques Tourneur. I watched that later this week, and it mostly revolves around Logan Stewart. This is a Western set in 1856 around the Oregon area, and it's about this ambitious freight company owner, Logan Stewart. He's trying to push his business, but at the same time, he's in a love triangle in the small town with his best friend and his best friend's fiance, and the town faces some hardships, particularly some attacks from Indians and or Native Americans, I should say, and the town banker, who is Logan's best friend, George Camrose, has been stealing from everyone. And this is an unusual Western because instead of, highlighting, simple themes, kind of like revenge or something, or like a hero coming into town, accomplishing some difficult feat, it's kind of more about the underlying themes, usually in a Western, more about like the cohesion of community and the conflict between individuals and kind of groupthink, wanting to be an individual in a developing society, and ultimately about the psychological and social meaning of westward trajectory, which is kind of a heavy subject. But this is a more responsible Western than I think a lot of those at the time, kind of woke, by today's standards even. There's a scene explicitly where one of the characters, and there's a lot of town characters, there's Logan Stewart's the main character, and he kind of drives the story, but it's mostly about the community. And it's more responsible because there's even a scene explicitly where one of the side characters states, why the Indians are mad. It's because, we're on their land, and most Westerns kind of don't, I guess, directly deal with that idea, like in it, or explicitly states it. And it's shown that, these Indians are not attacking for no reason. One of the town bully ended up raping a couple Indian women down by the creek, and that's why they're attacking the town. So it shows, it shows consequences for kind of Western expansion and the consequences that come with it. And but at the same time, it's still a very fun movie. It's shot in a beautiful Technicolor, and it just bounces off the screen. And Tourneur uses kind of basic color theory to highlight the otherness of some characters and stuff like that. And not a lot of close-ups in this movie for it being, because it's about the community. So it's kind of more wide frame shots of the community. There's even an extended scene where it's just kind of pleasant as the town builds a cabin for the local married couple. And there's not as much plot as you'd think in your average Western at the time. And that's what's kind of enjoyable about it. It's just kind of subverting kind of genre tropes of the Western. And something that really struck out to me, probably more so than anything else in the film, is its kind of commentary on violence in Westerns itself. And it kind of pulls its punches early on in the film on showing violence and stuff like that. Some of it happens off screen, but as the movie progresses, the violence becomes, it comes to fruition and it becomes very explicit. And almost this one scene where Logan fights the town bully who had personally kind of messed with him before, tried to steal things from him. They enter a fight, and he kind of does so reluctantly. The community pushes him into it, and makes him fight the bully. And he does so. He beats him up, but he gains no satisfaction from it, and kind of realizing that they're just kind of using him for his violence. And even at the end of the fight, he's like, are you guys satisfied? Did it satisfy you to see us fight? And that's obviously a commentary on the violence in Westerns itself. And this is my first Tourneur Western, and I enjoyed it a lot. I can't wait to dig into the rest of his Westerns, such as like Stars in His Crown. and stuff like that.
Yeah, Stars in My Crown is really great. And then sort of in the same way, it's sort of a casually paced movie, sort of episodic, but very much about the relationships between the people in this community and the sort of underlying political and social tensions in this community. He's a really smart filmmaker. I mean, I think that I Walked with a Zombie, is a great movie, but is also one of the more interesting American movies about colonialism, and I think one of the few movies that really grapples with that and with the baggage and the aftermath of colonialism. So it's I don't know, it's very interesting to see those sorts of ideas smuggled into movies that are otherwise sort of unassuming genre movies. They're not really going for some big CinemaScope widescreen experience. They're just these just structured little genre movies that have great ideas and great images.
Mm-hmm. And it strikes me how much, even though as a French director-tenor, he deals so much with kind of American culture, and that's definitely seen through a Canyon Passage. And I think it has a wonderful ending too, when Logan returns to his office to seeing that it's been robbed, it's been looted and destroyed, and he's bankrupt basically, and he just says, "You know what? We'll start again." And it's kind of it's kind of representative of kind of this a positive maybe look at the American experience, kind of, and especially Western expansion at that time.
Absolutely. Sometimes it takes an outsider to tell us things about ourselves. Maybe a non-American director should have made BlacKkKlansman. I don't know.
I think. No, never mind. All right. Well, I will wrap up part one. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back talking The Green Ray with Dan Molloy after this.
Hey Cinematariats, this is your co-host Lydia Creech with an important message during this break in the show. Cinematary would like you to know that we do not want your money, and we don't want to place ads in the show at this time either. That's not why we do this. We do it because we enjoy each other's company, and we want to bring you our pure, unadulterated opinions on the world of cinema. However, there are a few things you can do to help out the show that we would greatly appreciate. First, leave us a review on iTunes, 4 or 5 stars only, to help us reach more listeners per the algorithm gods. Secondly, send us a tweet at Cinematary, or better yet, send us an email at zach@cinematary.com. That's Zach, Z-A-C-H, so we can hear from you guys for a change. I'd especially like to hear if you're a human and not an android who also likes Blade Runner, or maybe you have a suggestion of a movie you would really like to hear our opinions on. Regardless, let us know your thoughts and we will read them out and respond to them on future episodes of the show. Finally, please share the show with friends and members of your family who you think would enjoy listening to and participating in our film discussions that we bring to you guys every week. So, to recap, review, send us your thoughts through Twitter and email, and please share with your friends and family. We would greatly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Now back to the show.
And we are back with episode 208 in part 2 of Cinematary. This part we will be concluding our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1986's The Green Ray. And joining us today is the person who selected this movie for us somewhat, Mr. Dan Molloy of the Catalyst and Witness podcast. Did I get that correctly?
Yes, he did. Yep, that's the podcast that Ryan Swen and I do, where we watch just about every lineup of the New York Film Festival, starting from 1963 until the present day. So it's a very long undertaking with very long episodes. So I'm not sure if it's been a smash hit yet, but we've had some good times on there.
We'll try to keep this to a smaller version of that. Yeah. We won't go too long.
So.
Well, The Green Ray, like I said, it came out in 1986. It's directed by Eric Rohmer, and he co-wrote it with the film star Marie Riviere. And the film follows Delphine, who is struggling after a breakup and then was dumped by her travel companion, who was going to go on a trip to Greece with her. So she attempts to find a supplemental trip for summer vacation, but continues to run into various issues. Personally, this is my first Rohmer, but Dan, I'm going to let you and Nathan probably lead this off because I know you were both. You suggested the film, and Nathan, I know, was a big champion of getting Rohmer on this list for us.
Yeah, this was one that I'd always enjoyed until I rewatched it today, and it sort of vaulted into one of my favorite films of all time. I think definitely my favorite Rohmer or Claire's Knee. It's really just, I think, this sort of ultimate, it's sort of like the ultimate Rohmer. It's like the highest, level of Rohmer that you can get. He was always, just a little bit of production history, was always sort of, I think, working to pare down the film crews and the amount of people he needed on set through the series of films that this is a part of, the Comedies and Proverbs. And so by the time you get to this one, I believe that this is the film where he really only had the actors, a camera operator, and a sound recorder. I mean, just the bare minimum. And so what you really see with this is that you get these whole implications and worlds of feeling in these sequences that are only just 3 or 4 shots and a few simple cuts, really, really not simple, but very essential compositions. It really just, I don't know how it connected to me so much this time around, but it has truly become, I think, one of the great films for me.
Dan, I think when you suggested this movie, I really was pushing for it for some of the same reasons. I mean, Rohmer is somebody who I am still a little bit woefully underseen on, and I think part of that is just because a lot of times he's one of those directors who I think a lot of people take their time getting to just because it's such an undertaking. I think he's a director where there's not necessarily a key canonical text that everyone has decided on.
Yeah, the entry point for him is like a set of 6 films, basically. Right. I mean, 2 of them are shorts, but it's a box set. Like that's the thing people go towards a lot.
And like you mentioned, he's throughout his career sort of problematizing the same concepts over and over again, sort of dealing with the same arrangements of characters, and working through sort of a formula, I think, for his entire career. So I think then it helps to, like, when you're getting into Rohmer, to sort of do a lot, which I still haven't. I've still been postponing a little bit. But The Green Ray is the movie that made him really click for me. I had seen My Night at Maud's too early, and this movie, I think, is just like, so I mean, this is like the simplest way to describe it, but it's just like one of the most painfully relatable movies, really painfully. And I know pretty much everyone here, I believe, are fans of Hong Sang-soo, and I feel like that is actually, like, through Hong Sang-soo's movies is sort of how I have the most familiarity with Rohmer, just because the two are constantly put together. So I sort of had an expectation going into this movie of kind of the relationship there, just with my familiarity with Hong. But this movie just hurts to watch in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and as I think Lawrence Garcia pointed out to us on Twitter today, this film, The Green Ray, is one of Hong Sang-soo's 10 films of all time in his official Sight and Sound director's ballot.
Yeah, I think you can absolutely see. down to even like kind of the acting style a little bit of Kim Min-hee in his recent movies, the sort of like constantly shifting, like physically indecisive performance. You can even see like a connection there.
She's always moving her hands, like she's never sure what to do with her hands in scenes. When she's talking, she's sort of moving them, but then she'll like start to, twirl her hair or something like that. And I think another thing, just another even like tiny detail that relates Romer, especially in this film, and Hong, is just that there will be scenes at restaurants or at family, home dinners where the food has all been eaten. No one's sitting at the table to eat anymore, but everyone's just sort of picking at the food or like playing with a single straw. And you just get this sense of, sort of endless, awkward conversation that's being moved around.
Except in this case, in that one scene where they're in Cherbourg, right? When the dinner and the guy brings out the raw pork chops.
Yes, true.
And then she has to explain why she doesn't eat meat.
Oh my God, one of the most just painful scenes. I'm not even a vegetarian, but just like having to explain something that you don't even have much of a justification for. Oh my God.
It's just lettuce is really friendly and light because it's not as heavy as meat,
Yeah.
It also just plays so perfectly, I think, even though this is a movie from 1986, it plays so perfectly contemporarily just because I feel like sometimes you're at some sort of event and you're talking about something, and in just the cultural sphere that we're in, it could immediately turn on you, and then you're backed up against a corner having to defend it from many different angles. Like I definitely sympathize with her when she's just having to rationalize and explain why she just eats the way she does, and they're just going, well, what about this? And do you eat fish?
And she spins off into like this sort of economic argument that doesn't make any sense. When she's saying like it would all be cheaper for us if we don't eat meat, and then someone immediately says, well, what about the butchers who get put out of business in that case? And just, it really, like, you see it. I could think of many times I've seen on Twitter people just arguing in that sort of way, and none of it is making any sense at all.
Yeah, and it's drawn out, to the point where like most of the people in the conversation don't even care anymore, and we're just kind of discussing this arbitrary thing that like maybe only 2 out of the 8 people in the group actually care about. I've been in those situations a lot. That more than I care to admit. So
it was that scene, and then earlier on when she's still trying to find a place to go where she doesn't want to go to Ireland, and she's talking to it seems like one of her friends. It's not a coworker, but Manuela, who offered Spain, but it's like her and 2 other friends before she gets invited to Cherbourg that she gets pinned down about why she doesn't want to go abroad alone or go on trips alone. Because, why don't you just meet people? And, she's trying to, say, it's like, well, I don't really like going abroad to meet people. And if, meeting people is just kind of awkward, or it's just not. So it's trying to find ways to say not contrive your way into a group vacation that you feel uncomfortable in, or something that's just off, which she does end up getting into until the last vacation spot, right?
Yeah, and she's trying to, something that really differentiates this film from a lot of other Romers is that in something like My Net at Maud's is basically full of this sort of conversation where Jean-Louis Trintignant in that film is spending so much time justifying and defining and then sort of redefining his very strict moral view of the world. And the whole film is basically a series of conversations and confrontations to that. And that's really his whole, in all of Romer's moral tales films. You really see that a lot. What really sets this apart, even from the other films and the comedies and Proverbs series, is that Delphine Riviere's character is just completely incapable of doing that. She has these ideas, in that scene where she says that she doesn't want to go on a group vacation, she's sort of she's sort of justifying it by saying, I'm just not the type to do that. Right. But then she has no real backing. She doesn't like say it with experience or in a more like Romerian touch of his other films to like have this very philosophical view of it. She just like can't even stick up for herself so much to say that she doesn't like something.
Yeah, that friend is like, what are you, closed-minded? She eventually just corners her and just calls her that. It's like, oh, no, why are you being so mean? Yeah, I mean, because, honestly, though, she was picking at her.
Yeah.
I feel like there's no Romerian intellectual in this film, as there are in like a lot of his other films. And I feel like another difference is like when I watch a Roma movie, usually like kind of maybe 3/4 of the way through or halfway through, I feel like I tend to get it more, where I feel like there's more, like there's some sort of thing revealed about the character's intentions, etc., or something like that. But in this, I feel like it maintains the same tone almost throughout, up until the end, which is kind of a relief. But
this one's a lot more searching than other Romero films, like. Yeah, I would definitely agree with you on that one. I actually think this one, if this film bears any similarity to another Romero film, it's A Summer's Tale from 1996, which stars Miville Poupard as this guy who sort of has 3 women in his life, and he's basically just trying to choose between them on his summer vacation, and then he decides, ultimately he chooses none of them so he can go write these weird sea shanties.
That's so wrong.
Yeah, they both have these, the characters haven't defined the world for themselves yet, unlike, many of his other characters. And so they do have these real searching qualities in the scenes. The scenes will tend to go on quite a bit longer, and the conversation is much less structured. I don't actually know if this one was improvised, but I feel like the idea behind this production was that Romer would conceive of this character with Delphine, and then they would sort of create the situations and then sort of let it play out between the actors. It was rehearsed a bit, but not necessarily as scripted as I think his other films were. And so I think, yeah, you definitely see that here. And the lack of intellectualism really leads to that much more searching quality, which is what the Jules Verne text that shares the name with the film is referred
into
as.
That conversation, right, with the older people talking about
is
the Green
walking
Ray.
by, and then she just sits there and eavesdrops.
Enjoys it.
But then you get the old guy who does explain, like, scientifically why the Green Ray happens. So after they're all just like, I've all read the book and we'd like to see that. It sounds really good. But then the old guy's like, well, if you want me to explain it to you, I can explain to you why the Green Ray is the way it is. While Delphine just eavesdropping in the background, listening to it. So like she ends up like picking up something that it becomes consequential to her story right at the very end.
Right. And that's it. I mean, it's like the most low key journey film like that's ever been filmed. Like the key to like her finding happiness, or at least like a brief moment of joy, and a moment of connection with another person, which is sort of what she's really been searching for the whole film, is like only found because she hears some old geezers talking at the beach about a Jules Verne adventure story.
But it comes like kind of dreadful at the end, right? Like right before the Green Ray actually appears, that she starts to cry, and you get the feeling that maybe it won't happen. That she'll sit there and wait for it, and it could happen, but what if it doesn't? And then thank God it does happen, so it's okay. But man, that really hurt for the last minute of that movie.
Yeah, Romer said actually about the improvisation part, I have a quote that I remember from his biography. It says, based on this film, he said, "I'm reproached for writing sentences that are too long, but in life people talk a long time without stopping. And I'm going to demonstrate that. No one will see the difference between a text I've written and an improvised text." That was his basic idea for the film.
Oh, okay, that's it. Yeah, I knew it was something that way, and that makes total sense for what he does. And that's definitely another Hong Sang-soo connection, is that in Hong films, these scenes are protracted and there are all these sort of zooms, but at the same time, after everyone's had enough soju, people will just be trailing off into all these, circles that they talk themselves into.
And that's the thing, is I think that even though it does have this very aimless quality to it, that it is so structured too, and even feels a little bit to me like maybe it's just because we talked about Duel a couple of weeks ago, but in some ways almost reminds me a little bit of a Rivette movie, just in the series of magical coincidences that sort of structure the movie, this constant referencing, of astrology and the card that she finds, and just like this sort of, the color green, the coincidence of that, the way that in this almost sort of mystical way, like unites the whole movie, as opposed to having some sort of clear narrative or even emotional structure to it. It's like this, it's just united by coincidences.
Yeah.
That one made me kind of paranoid, because I felt like I started noticing green more in the frame as soon as they started saying it. Like, when the conversation where it comes up, one of the girls, the one that invites her to Cherbourg, is wearing like all lime green. It's just like, oh, is the movie making fun of this? I don't know what's happening.
It is a very
color theory.
It is a very low key sort of color theory put into practice, because he has that a bit going on. Like I think his first color feature was La Collectionneuse, and that sort of works with color in a interesting way, the colors of that sort of summer villa in that film. But here, I think this is like really one of the fewer films of his where, there's like a sort of primary color throughout the whole film. And, it's easy to sort of make green the sort of recurring organizing color of a film when you're just sort of filming in nature. Like in Cherbourg, there's this amazing sequence where Delphine just sort of takes a walk by herself on a rainier day, and then she just ends up crying by herself in this sort of green pasture. And it's, she's surrounded by this color that will eventually, lead her to her relief. But it's, they're throughout the film, you'll see more green in just like on plates, on clothes. I think maybe one of the old people who are talking about the Jules Verne book is wearing green. I can't quite remember that, but it is something that you just subtly pick up on. I think it's one of the most brilliant but subtle uses of color theory in a film.
So I think it's that, and then red recurs a lot. Like she always has, or just about always has, that red jacket on.
With the green beret on top, too.
Mm-hmm. I think, also in Cherbourg, when they're like the second time they're kind of having that casual conversation, the guy has like a red bandana on just wrapped around his head with and there's just, a lot of red spots and chairs also.
I'm curious to talk a little bit about Marie Riviere's performance in this, because I found a quote that Romer stated about her, saying that, quote, she's the only one who called the shots, not only by what she said, but by the way she'd speak, the way she'd question people, and also by the questions her character evoked from the others. And I think that the one that stands out to me is the scene when she's talking with her friends, and she's kind of having that argument with the very pushy friend who's trying to kind of figure out why she's not happy traveling alone, and why she's not dealing with her breakup in the way that she thinks that she should. We've talked a lot about Hong Sang-soo, but what is this lead performance by her kind of compared to some of the lead conduits, whether it's Kim Min-hee or many of the other actresses, even Isabelle Huppert, that he uses in his films?
There's definitely a sort of connection, I think, between Kim Min-hee and Riviere here. Is that sort of, I think, also a similar sort of searching quality. Just thinking of On the Beach at Night Alone, or even in a little bit in the Day After too. That actually, I don't quite know what I was going off of, so someone else can check.
Well, this isn't exactly about Kim and Hee, but just I was sort of thinking about Hong in another scene in the movie, when Delphine goes out with that girl from the beach and gets really upset, and the woman and like the guy she's talking to are flirting in like 4 different languages, just sort of bleeding in and out of each other, which reminded me a lot of Hong again. You know, recently in movies like On the Beach at Night Alone and Clear's Camera, where you have the Kim Min-hee character in an unfamiliar country speaking it, or you know, even in another country with Isabelle Huppert, you know, who you mentioned, Zach, where you have these sort of miscommunications of characters not communicating in their first languages. You know, you have like sort of jokes that arise out of that situation of language, and which it felt like a very, I don't know, an interesting detail about Europe that I feel like I have not seen a lot. I don't know, maybe I just haven't really been noticing it, but just like the weird position of being European and having all these different languages in very close contact with one another, and you know, a lot of people know a little bit of a lot of different languages, and here you have these 2 characters who are just going in and out of multiple languages, and I just was sort of fascinated by that in relation to like how language is used in the rest of the movie, since the rest of the movie is so much about the failures of Delphine's ability, you know, to communicate.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, she's like in her corner, right? While both the guy that comes over with the guy that's flirting with the friend, the Swedish lady that she meets up with, that they're all like kind of focused on her, while Delphine's just in a corner, like really not wanting to be there. Having no way to communicate as they go back and forth between like German and English, back to French and back again. It's just would rather leave. Oh, okay, but you're gonna make plans for me to do stuff later. Oh, okay. And then right at the end of that scene, she like breaks out and runs away from it completely.
Truly the most relatable part of the whole film.
Why?
Yeah.
Out of the other,
and she's almost even.
I thought.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
That it was to your point, Dan and Malcolm, about kind of the production history and the I don't want to say lackadaisical, but more improvisatory, where it feels like so much more of the characters are just outside of the frame compared to something like My Night at Maud's or Love in the Afternoon, where they're still there, and he's definitely trying to focus on like a pair of characters at once, but he'll like pan it, but there's like always stuff happening outside of the frame that I didn't feel like was there before. And especially, go ahead.
Yeah, he pans. I mean, thinking of that sort of vegetarian scene again, he's panning and like looking at different people's reactions to Delphine's, you know, sputtering basically, but then we'll hear someone talk to her, but they're not in the frame. So then it sort of gets back there, but it's like after they've spoken, and then we're just back to Delphine again. And I think that's like, even in that scene, Nathan, that you brought up, where there's that sort of multilingual flirting going on, you know, like we're not really seeing Delphine for quite like a few minutes at least, which is, you know, in a film that's mostly centered on her, quite a little bit of time. And then by the time we do, we actually see she's in the, not just in the corner of the table, but in the corner with the other guy's like arm kind of awkwardly wrapped around her chair too. So, you know, I think Romero is sort of using that, what we're seeing and what we're not seeing to sort of create these dynamics that we can sort of come back to once he decides to sort of bring the camera back there, which is, you know, something you don't necessarily expect in a film like this. You would expect it much more to be straightforward conversations, which I think that this actually sets him apart from Hong, because Hong is much more, you know, for the two shots showing two characters sitting at, you know, opposite ends of a table and then selectively sort of zooming in on them. Romero in this film, at least, and I can't think of too many other instances of it, except for maybe A Summer's Tale in his other work, is really, yeah, I think lackadaisical maybe isn't the right word, but he's much more laid back about it and a little more selective, but he's much more subtle in how he's getting there.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, like I feel like I felt the awkwardness of her character and her situation even more because it was willing to just leave her behind in it.
Yeah,
and it's just
in her own movie. Yeah.
It just, you feel like you're more surrounded by the other characters because of it. You're like, oh yeah, right. She's kind of stuck in this social situation.
I mean, even the eavesdropping scene, you know, it's like totally, she's there and we still have this sort of knowledge of her presence, but for a good period of time, she's not the focus of the scene. And she almost is just this sort of like compass or something, you know, to sort of just like guide us into a scene and then serve no other real central purpose in that scene. It's just, she is just leading us there and then collects us when that scene is over and like takes us to the next scene. Yeah, me too.
And I enjoy that, to be honest, because like a film, you know, about one person's own emotional torture, like being with them that whole time could be a lot, you know, and it's kind of nice to get like these breaths, and it's kind of like, you know, works how when you're alone, when you observe people, you know, you're kind of just observing that conversation like she is. So I find that enjoyable. Works well within the framework of the film.
I mean, to your point, Malcolm, about like this kind of I don't want to say emptiness, but definitely like a tortured feeling that she has of being alone in a crowd, where she was trying to explain it, I think, to the Swedish lady that she met. But there's like a way in which she wants someone to like see something in her that she doesn't feel like normally happens. Because like most of the movie, when she's just kind of out and about, she's alone while other people are enjoying the beach or going skiing in the mountain resort area, or even kind of having like other, what was it, in Cherbourg, where she was with the one daughter character, I think, while two other couple, the one that brought her there was like making out in the background. That there's to your point, like a feeling of that lone tension, but right at the very end when she like beats that guy in the train station, that like he keeps staring, but like not in that same way that when she gets back to Paris, that this one guy just kind of creepily standing or sitting next to her, and that eventually like offers her a cigarette. And I think that's actually the mid part of the movie, where here at the end, this guy's like kind of trying to low-key talk with her, but not like overwhelm her with his presence.
True.
That I think by the time we get to that point in the movie, that maybe she's talked herself into that point of like self-realization or whatever, at least maybe relaxation or like understanding of herself a little bit more, or at least what she was going through at that moment.
Yeah.
Because the absence of Jean-Pierre, right, is kind of a subtext in the movie, right? The person that, Zach, you brought up, it's not Caroline who she was going to Greece with, but this guy that was apparently her fiance at one point, but like, he's like, we can't go on summer vacation. I'm going to be in the Riviera, but I guess you can go to the mountains if you want, but I'm not going to be there. So like even her friend character is like, you guys are over, right? But she refuses to acknowledge it through like the vast majority of the movie, even telling like that daughter character that, no, I have a boyfriend. Actually, I have a couple, but one, you know, I'm kind of more with. So yeah, wow.
Yeah. I think, to your point that there is, that sort of structuring absence of Jean-Pierre, but we also do, like the scene I mentioned earlier in Cherbourg, we get all these moments of her alone too. So we do sort of track, not necessarily like her character development or anything, but how she's dealing with being by herself, which is a thing I think this movie does extremely well that very few films otherwise do, which is just how to film someone being alone and not feel a need to bring us in with voiceover or a music cue or anything like that. Just by their own presence and how how they're interacting with the space. Like, for example, when she's in that room that the woman she meets up with in Paris offers to her on the beach. I can't remember the name of that beach town, but when she's in that room, which is, this other woman's family's room, she's, putting all the framed pictures away. She's putting all the sense that like this is someone else's space away so that she can forget about all the other people around. And, I feel like we don't get any scene like that before in the film. And, this is also a scene where she doesn't cry. So that's another sign. But, I think that like the absence of a sort of character that she can go back to and have these conversations with about herself, who probably knows her a bit better, like Jean-Pierre, is, certainly intentional and really does give this sense of loneliness and like a sense of a person sort of figuring themselves out that, Romer is able to capture in a way that few other directors are.
And he does it in such a cinematic way, because like you described, there's no voiceover going, "I'm so lonely, I'm so sad to be in this space," to just kind of take the weight out of it. I think that there will be a disconnect for a lot of people because they're not used to observing and recognizing and seeing that this person is just deeply lonely, whether that's they're satisfied with that or they're struggling with that. Like I think that he captures it in just such a I guess a kind of empathetic light. He shows her as she is. It's pretty bare bone, and he does it, and I think it's so effective because there's no coddling you as the audience to understand what she's feeling.
I think to your point, Zach, and Dan brought it up in that Cherbourg sequence especially, but like the amount of time that we're just watching her walk around and just being in that space, as you say, is like surprising, because I felt like for a chunk of this movie, I kind of like keyed out a little bit during these traveling scenes, because like, oh, she's just going somewhere. I don't really have to pay attention. I just got to know when she's there. But like after a while, I was like, oh no, these are very important, like small in between scenes that, even though they feel transitory because they are, they're actually like speaking to what she's getting in the middle of. Like,
it is. I think it's definitely worth discussing just how much Delphine and Riviere performs crying in this movie, just like crying alone, and the sort of uncontrollable and not non-cathartic crying, which is something that I think films just don't even have an idea of or a conception of, that this film really dives into. It's not like a cinematic device by any stretch, or it doesn't feel to me like the scenes where she cries are structured or placed in any particular way. They're just like these sort of naturally occurring things where like her loneliness and her depression with her own life just sort of catches up to her, and she just can't help it anymore. She can't not cry, which is another sort of brilliant device that this film employs.
It's not as intense, but it does, like, those moments do remind me of some of the characters who just break down and start crying in like an Ozu movie.
Yeah.
Do you feel that you feel this intense? You feel the intense emotion of why this person is just breaking down and crying. But like I said, the Delphine is a little bit less intense whenever she does that than when Setsuko Hara just throws her hands into her head into her hands and just breaks down.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like it's sort of just overcomes her, and she always like turns away from it if she's with another person. I think when it first occurs, it's that scene where she was talking to her friends about why she didn't want to go to Ireland, and she just sort of leaves and sits on the stairs and then they start talking about how like weird she is or something like that. And so then one other friend comes over, and just the very like presence of another person who like actually like cares enough to check in on her is just like so, I think, overwhelming to her that she just starts to cry. And it happens in that scene with the Swedish woman and the two dudes too. She'll just break down. But I think, it really is more from not like the, weariness with her own life, but just like the fact that it hasn't been crying for so long is too much for her to bear.
A bit of structuring that does seem to happen, though, is the intertitles with the dates, that they kind of feel like arbitrary bits of like time counting. But in that scene that you're talking about, it ends up kind of playing like that scene right at the end for comedy, because it cuts to like, oh, but you can come with me to Cherbourg, guys, like she's, in the middle of crying, and it cuts to the next day, and now they're in Cherbourg about to get hit on by a guy.
That is a very Romerian touch. In Claire's Knee, there's another comic intertitle that's right at that level too.
Okay.
Yeah, so they do seem very like arbitrary at first, but then he does employ them with a lot more intention.
As we kind of wind down, I'm kind of curious to hear, especially from people who have seen more of Romero's work, what for people like me who this is my entry point into him. What I guess one, this movie does to kind of introduce you to him in a good way, and two, what on a second watch to kind of to I guess see from his work that you feel like is what is so special about him as a director.
I think that as I mentioned at the beginning, that this is sort of like the highest level of Romero that you can get, because he's sort of pared everything down from his other films. So, in looking at the other ones, they're a lot more verbose and eloquent. There's a lot more structure behind the dialogue, and people are talking much more about things than sort of using different subjects to sort of circle around and have these strange non-conversations with. But I think that there is, throughout his work, this very low-key, like pictorial quality that, like his films are just absolutely beautiful, but they're not in like a sort of one perfect shot way. They just sort of give this sense of an atmosphere and a social milieu, and then, these sort of really great depths of feeling that you have to be a bit tuned into and sort of on the film's wavelengths to get there. But, I've seen, it looks like, just looking at Letterboxd, I've seen 20 of his films so far. That's features and shorts. And, as I think through them, he really does sort of work with very similar setups, but he always changes he varies them in different ways, that you're always seeing a different set of characters, different types of personalities too. I think he was probably, I haven't read the biography of him, but I feel like he was a bit of an astrological person, especially that's a bit of a thread through this film. But I think, the main quality that really makes him a special director is his way to sort of cut through how people see themselves and how that's contradicted in these conversations that they have and the choices that they make. But then sort of also, as we see with this film, how coincidence and, very strange circumstances that no one really thinks of consciously will sort of bubble up and, make things all right again, or come to these conclusions that we're just not expecting. And, none of the films are very dramatic, but they always are riveting as they get there.
I always feel like there's like kind of a building up quality to his films, and the more time you spend, with these characters that he's created, like the more things are revealed, the more, the movie starts to connect for me personally and stuff like that. And I feel like he plays a lot with like just typical archetypes and how, people kind of play into the role that they're given within their social circles and stuff like that. And a lot of summer movies, kind of an arbitrary point, but I feel like Romer's like the king of the end of summer. I just watched Pauline at the Beach, and it's another August movie, and it's, I could see some similarities in Pauline at the Beach, especially since they were made so close together. But he really knows all about the dog days of summer and kind of just like the weird feeling you get when you try to relax and you just can't. It's life's too oppressive. Even though there's not that much in your life pointing towards you being oppressed, you still kind of feel that way. I feel like a lot of Romer characters, bourgeoisie but unsatisfied by life.
Nathan, do you have any final thoughts?
Not particularly. Just that this is a great film. Good movie. Good times.
Trouble talking about Romer for some reason. Some things I feel like cannot be eloquently said, I guess.
Yeah. It causes it. It's sort of like Green Ray itself, the non-conversation. It's hard to be precise about what it is exactly that he does. I think he's sort of one of those directors.
Tough to run across very good film criticism about him too. That's something I've noticed. He's not a particularly written about director in a way that Jacques Rivette or his other colleagues in the French New Wave sort of were. Some, like Godard and Truffaut were written about to death, but there is this wealth of things to admire and appreciate in Romer's films, but they just don't. It's hard to put them into words and into sort of succinct phrases.
Right. I think that because of the sort of repetition across his filmography and the sort of playing through ideas and formulas and arrangements over and over again, I think it's that makes it harder to talk about, because you have to sort of absorb, I feel like, the bulk of his filmography to really figure out what it is that he's doing. But it's also, it just means you're spending more time trying to get after that. Whereas, something like the 400 Blows, you go to it and it's this is what we have all agreed upon is some sort of statement about who Truffaut is as an artist, and we've just never been able to get there with Romer.
Very nice. Well, Dan, thank you so much for coming on and joining us for this episode.
Of course, yeah. Thank you for having me.
I guess if you want, plug again where people can find your podcast and everything.
Oh, sure, yeah. The podcast is called Catalyst and Witness. I think we're on iTunes mostly. I don't know if we're on SoundCloud or not. But yeah, I record that with Ryan Swen, so you can follow both of us on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at Dan Molloy. That's Y-O between my first and last name. My profile picture is Thomas Pynchon's hand and a pig piñata, so it should be pretty easy to find.
Good stuff, everybody. And thank you for listening. You can find us on social media at facebook.com/Cinematary, at Twitter at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we post all the movies that we talked about in this episode. Next week, we will be beginning a new series. We will be looking at the work of director Kelly Reichardt. We did a director series last year with The Archers. We're going to do two kind of the end of the year this year and sandwich them in between our October horror series. But first, we're going to look at the works of Kelly Reichardt. It should be a very fun one. We're going to start with her directorial debut, River of Grass. So stick around for that. But as always, thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week.